And we'll get started with Michael, if you want to take us through just a little bit more about what you studied in school and a little bit about what you do today before we get into the panel.
Sure. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm Michael Collins. I'm class of 2007, double majored in African American Studies and Gender and Sexuality Studies. I'm currently the Chief of Staff to the Chief Diversity Officer at Google, based in New York City.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Adair. You can call me Jen. I am a class of '02 grad poli-sci major, and I am currently the Deputy Director in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Ohio Department of Administrative Services. In that capacity, I act as the State DEI Officer for Ohio. I also am an elected member of our Board of Education for Columbus City School District, which is the largest district in Ohio, and I serve as president.
Hi, my name is Chris Manning, he, him, his. I was a 2003 graduate with a PhD in American history. I am the inaugural Chief Diversity Officer of the University of Southern California. And prior to that, I was the inaugural Associate Provost for Academic Diversity at Loyola.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your, I'm sure, very busy schedules to be here and share this expertise and your experience with the students and recent alumni that we have as well. So I'll get into the first question. Can you tell us more about what you do today, along with some of the maybe impactful classes or experience for you that you had in undergraduate that, or just your time at Northwestern, that led you to consider and also pursue a path in diversity, equity, and inclusion work?
Okay, I'll go. So what I do every day at this point, because I've been at USC for about 2 months, is essentially I'm in a phase of trying to understand the organization. USC is the largest employer in Southern California, and our total population, students, faculty, staff, is around 70,000. So as far as institutions of higher education goes, it's pretty gigantic. And we also have 23 different colleges and schools, which I think might be the largest number amongst elite institutions, and it's very decentralized. So what has been interesting at USC is that over the last 10 years or so, we've had a lot of individual people and individual units engaged in DEI initiatives, but there's been no coordination. And because there hasn't been coordination across the institution has not seen the sort of movement forward that it would like to see. So a lot of what I'm doing right now is trying to, one, ascertain what has been done across this institution, to determine the extent to which there's alignment across those existing initiatives. 3, places where there are alignment, can synergies be created such that they are effectively organized centrally to move the university forward? And then 4, trying to identify where there are spaces for new work that needs to be done that can also move the institution towards its goals. With regard to the second question, I didn't really take any classes at Northwestern that led me to DEI work. I actually went to getting the PhD very specifically with the goal of being able to have a positive impact on Black and Brown and working class people. What I would say is that my time at Northwestern broadened my perception such that I began to realize that a lot of the essentialized categories that we use, such as race, class, sex, gender expression, etc., are all things that we decided to make at some specific time. So for example, there is a professor in history named Tim Breen who helped us to see very specifically when the colonies determined to separate African servants from European servants, and call one group slaves and call one group servants. And to see on paper that that was a decision that people made at one point that has had ramifications for the next 400 years really affected me. So in my teaching and in my practice, I try to help people understand that all this stuff around us that we have so oppressive is stuff that we made. and that if we made it, we also have the power to unmake it.
I'll go next. So I'm going to start with the second question, because actually mine is really similar to what Chris said. So I'm a poli-sci major, and I would say my intention of being a poli-sci major was that I was planning to go to law school, and I did. I'm a lawyer. I went to law school. And so I wasn't actually looking to go into this field. But I would say that in general, my whole experience, I think at Northwestern as a Black student, definitely lended a lot to, understanding the why and why it's this kind of field is important. I think for me, I went to a public, the schools that I'm actually the president of school board for, I went to public education, and even coming into Northwestern, finding myself to be even different than the other Black kids that were there. And so I think that in truth, I couldn't say it's one class. It was just the overall experience I had at Northwestern that really helped me see race actually for the first time, and understanding the idea of power and privilege. Even though I probably didn't have those words then, I do now, as Chris was saying. But truly that experience really is foundational for the reason why I think I love this work so much. So right now, like I said, I am the state DEI officer for the state of Ohio. So my clients are all of our state agencies. I also work with the other elected, such as the legislature, the Supreme Court of Ohio, and other executive level. And we do full scale DEI planning. So our agencies do everything from affirmative action to looking at what we call external equity, which is right now obviously very hot in terms of what's going on with COVID and health equity. And so we really do, we look at our workforce, we look at our policies and procedures, and then we look at our public services. And just like Chris said, we're really looking at, for us, it's not just to check the box, it's really about digging into the systems, finding that systemic bias, finding the systemic oppression, and getting rid of it. Because like Chris said, it was created and government is the #1 perpetrator of it. And so being able to holistically talk about it with a cohesive agenda where all state agencies and departments can kind of work together, we think is going to be really beneficial. So technically I'm in year 4 of this work, but I will say that we switched governors kind of in the middle, and even under Republican administration, it hasn't been until the last maybe year and a half, actually spurred by the events of last summer, that really pushed this work forward. And so that's what we're doing. And then on the school side of things, we are taking a look at systemic bias and oppression in education and public education, and advocating on that. We've issued some really strong statements. Actually, we're like the #2 with police shootings in the nation right now. So we've issued some statements around that. And so, the work kind of follows me into any role that I'm in. It's just, I can't help but look into it and kind of push that agenda. So that's what we're working on.
And at risk of being redundant, I can't agree enough with Chris and Jen around the academic underpinning, kind of getting me focused on otherism, on systems of oppression, on the ways that all these things are in conversation with one another. Certainly is cross-applicable to the bodies of work that I'm doing now at Google. I'll say that added to that were the things that I was engaged with outside of the classroom. So I was very active with student activities, specifically FMO. I was coordinator of FMO when I was there. And, that got me very comfortable speaking truth to power, but also understanding both broad and very narrow focuses around oppression, and really getting really thoughtful about how you might want to intervene and what sites of political intervention are available to you. I think that the academic piece and the student activities piece came together for me in a way that had me thinking that by the time I left Northwestern, every site was a site of political intervention if you wanted it to be. And using that as an underpinning for, my work and how I move through this world, I think I landed at diversity, equity, and inclusion on a corporate level because I understood that the work needed to be done there too, and that there was an opportunity to change both the political and social narrative from within the belly of the beast, that beast being capitalism, in ways that were very thoughtful, very progressive, and also, could potentially be quite sustainable. At this very moment, as the chief of staff or chief diversity officer, I work very closely with her as a strategic thought partner, really identifying where the gaps are in our broader enterprise-wide strategy. I also kind of laugh that I'm kind of her confidant and personal therapist at times as well, because this work actually is quite draining and calls on several different parts of you. And so it does require you to have people close to you in your inner circle that you can bounce ideas off of, but that can also kind of rally you, keep you all supported and propped up. Prior to this role, though, I was leading diversity for Google's cloud business, which is about 35,000 folks, which gave me the opportunity to really kind of move the pieces around on my own accord, rather than necessarily supporting someone else and leading in the way that I do now.
Thank you all so much for sharing more about the impactful experiences on campus and how that plays out in your work today. And I know we have a number of students and young alumni on the line today who are excited to consider this career path for themselves. And I'd love to dive a little bit more into your first job after school, because a lot of you said, this wasn't exactly what you thought your career would end up being when you were, in these students' shoes. So if you could share more about that first job out of school, and then how did you strategize to getting to, a role where you're making these large impacts, eventually down the road. So Michael, maybe we can start with you and talk about that first role. And
yeah. So I graduated thinking I was going to become a professor. So as soon as I left Northwestern, I went to Columbia. I got my master's in African American studies. Loved it, loved this idea of living a life of the mind, but got a little bit disillusioned that there didn't seem to be as much of a bias for action within the academic setting that I was looking for. And this will kind of answer, I think, another question that is on the list of questions y'all sent me. But I took time after getting my master's to just really live it up in New York and rage and party and do all the things that I think a middle 20-something probably should be doing. But worked retail and really, I think, had an opportunity to step away from all things high impact, high touch, high everything that we have been doing in college and graduate school. And didn't really know what I wanted to do until a friend of mine put me onto a research analyst role at this small company called Diversity Best Practices, which is based in New York. And so I started doing insights and analytics research for them around best practices in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it was, I think, kind of my first foray into understanding the bodies of work. I think at that time it was just diversity and inclusion. We weren't really talking about equity, but got me very conversant in like what it meant and how it would show up in a company, and what the broader conversation was. And so it was a really great opportunity to transition from being a pseudo party boy in New York to someone that was actually doing something less social. Yeah, so.
Am I next, Cassie? I don't remember the order. Okay, yes, I'm next. So like Michael, I already told you I went to law school. So my first job out of law school was being a litigator. And I did that for the state of Ohio. I've always been in public service. And so I did that for the state of Ohio in our attorney general's office. And then I had a variety of roles. After I got kind of tired of litigating for 6 years, I went and I did some work with our Department of Medicaid. And then I did some work on law enforcement policy. And kind of just intertwined with all of that, I really got connected into our legal profession, and working with our affinity bar here in Columbus, Ohio, became the president of that, was able to sit at the table with some of our large law firms to talk about diversity and inclusion at the time, right? And, I would be the only in the room and someone that's not even in a law firm because of these positions that I held. And so as I kind of worked through that, and then, just, every day, I think the other panelists would agree, you kind of, you live it. So, that kind of prompted me just getting involved, and that involvement in my work, in my profession, kind of gave me a reputation for, being able to get things done. And so I fell into this type of job, and took advantage of an opportunity to really expand it into something that I thought would be more beneficial for state government. And so, it was never my intention to be here. In fact, when I was asked would I consider joining the HR team and doing a role of diversity recruiting, I said, "Are you crazy? I'm a lawyer. What are you talking about? I don't do that." But it really was this idea that, I could take this opportunity and seize the moment and do something bigger and propose something bigger than what they offered me even. And so so my first job was a lawyer, a litigator. And I guess what that does for me today is it helps me know my clients, because it's still the state of Ohio. I still work for the state of Ohio. And so that helps me have legitimacy with my clients, being able to represent all 60 of them, because I've been there with them through all my years in public service.
So, excuse me, I didn't exactly have a first job out of grad school. During grad school, I was a founder of what became the largest Latin dance school in the city of Chicago. So I was the senior dance instructor there from 1997. And during that time, I was also a choreographer and performer and an artistic director of a company. And during that work, during that time period, which would say middle of grad school through say 2016, I always had a DEI lens in both of my careers. So one career was an academic and one career was as a professional performing artist. So as a performing artist, I was very aware of the power of Latin music. And when I say Latin music, I don't mean like ballroom rumba. I mean like cha-cha, merengue, cumbia, salsa, bachata, mambo, etc. The syncretic nature of the music, and also the way it brought cultures together. So when I was a really poor graduate student with all these, what to me felt like rich kids at Northwestern, I would catch the train and go downtown and do the free dance lesson. So then I could stay in the club for free. And it was cool because it didn't matter that I was a poor Black kid from Alabama. The only thing that counted was how well I could dance. And the environment was very diverse. And I always appreciated that. And so as I developed as an instructor, as an artist, I tried to bring that to my classrooms. And then when I started my nonprofit, Inspiración Dance Chicago, we used Latin dance to bring together Black and Latino kids in public schools. And I also had a very diverse dance company. And again, it was always about syncretism, and we bring different kinds of music together too. So we tried to embody that vision. Simultaneously, around 2003, or 2001, which was several years before I finished the PhD, I became an assistant professor of history at Loyola. And my goal as a professor was always to teach my students to understand societal structures so they could take them apart, period. And as I evolved from my time in graduate school, by the time I was a professor, I was focused again on race, class, sex, gender expression, sexual orientation, etc. And I would really appreciate these beautiful moments where you would see an array of students at the board all working on a problem like trying to understand white racial formation in the late 19th century. Because to me, it was like, those will be just a few less dumb people out there, was how I thought about it. Like people who could really understand how these things work. So I was engaging in those careers simultaneously. Around 2016, during that phase of student protest, the president of Loyola brought together Black faculty to have a conversation. And I was like, if I have to go to one more conversation with people of color to talk about things, I'm gonna drive myself crazy. So I determined to go into that meeting and talk about very programmatic ways to address inequality within our institution, because a lot of times in these conversations there's a lot of virtue signaling and a lot of rhetorical stuff, but that lacks substance. And I was very determined to make those kinds of points. And after coming out of the meeting, the president asked me if I'd be their special advisor on race. And maybe not dissimilar to Jennifer's situation, the president asked me if I could be their eyes and ears on race issues. And I was like, I'm too educated to be somebody's eyes and ears. So I asked very specifically if I could create programming that would improve the circumstances of our faculty of color and students of color, because otherwise I wouldn't do the job. And they were like, oh, sure. And there's this tendency with DEI work, because there aren't too many places that give degrees in it. And even those places that do, I'm not sure about those degrees. But there's a tendency in DEI work that if you are willing to do the work, if you can develop a really heightened emotional intelligence where you're able to be empathetic and work people through their own vulnerabilities while keeping yourself protected, and if you have the passion for change, you will find those roles coming to you, I think. Particularly if you're in an environment that is conscious of trying to change itself. If you're in an environment that's not conscious of changing itself, they won't find you. But if you're in a place where people are seeking help and seeking change, and you have that sort of ability, it will start to come your direction.
Awesome. This is awesome. Thank you all for those answers. Because I feel like you already led us into something that we're going to talk about in our next question. But just hearing about your dance background and then the ways that like intersects with your current work is just really amazing. So my question is, what has surprised you about what you learned or did in school that helps you in your work today? And then a little bit more about sharing those kinds of ways that you talked about maybe different fields in interviews and in your DEI work that kind of have that crossover. Because Jen, I'm sure you know this, like there's steps to being a lawyer, there's steps to being a doctor, like what are the steps kind of, and what can you incorporate in your networking, in your speech to get into DEI? And we can start with that. Michael.
Yeah, I think it's a really fabulous question. As Jen and Chris were speaking, I was like, wait, I think I left out like a whole big swath of things that informed how I got here. And so I don't want to make it sound like I like landed in a job and then the next thing I did was go to Google. But you know, I think to answer your first question, Amani, there's something to being a systems thinker and just really understanding, you know, systems more broadly, how they inform the bodies of work that you'll ultimately be doing. I talk about my degree in African American studies and, you know, gender studies, but mostly in terms of understanding how to think, like thinking systemically and thinking through a problem and complex problems more specifically in bite-sized chunks. And I think that has cross applicability to probably any body of work that you might take on at any given moment in your career. It becomes less about what you're a subject matter expert in and more about, you know, the type of thinking and the way that you think about the bodies of work that you're taking on and the field that you're kind of working within. And I think that's going to be kind of the critical element as you're having probably the earliest interviews that you'll have in your career is, you know, how you're thinking about problems, like what you think the problem actually is, how you're able to state that back to the person that you're talking to, and then being able to effectively communicate the solutions that you see coming to light. I want to go back to another question though, because after research analyst, I did go to business school. I did do strategy consulting at Accenture before joining Google. All of that I think informs kind of the broader bodies of work that I do, but I think are in conversation with the systemic thinking that I was just thinking about, right? And just talking about is that all of those things require you to be able to identify a problem, state it very succinctly, and then start to, you know, really walk people through your thinking on how you might address that issue or that big problem that you're trying to face. And certainly that has a ton of cross applicability when you're working with them pretty complex systems in a corporate space.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Chris.
Okay, Oops, am I on? Yeah, okay. So as I understood it, it was a question about how our education lended itself to our current work. And I'd say a couple things. The first thing I would say is that doing a dissertation, particularly in a field like history, keeps me from being as freaked out by the work as I could be. So, you know, my dissertation was, I don't know, 500 pages long and took 10 years of work to do. And when I started grad school before the master's, if someone told me, okay, you need to make up an interesting topic that no one has ever done, but will be interesting, and write a 500-page paper on it that will have 20 to 30 pages of bibliography, I'd be like, it would just feel crazy. So the experience of having done something that seems literally crazy makes doing DI work, which can seem literally crazy, a little bit less scary because I've been through crazy before. Turned out I was all right, and you know, you can do it. So that work put things in personal perspective. The other thing I would say about my work at Northwestern, with being a historian in particular, is that it puts the DEI work in perspective. When you have a long-term view of the development of the United States and how it got to be the way that it was, it can kind of de-escalate the moment in some ways, while at the same time allowing you to be attentive to the people for whom the moment itself is escalated, which is kind of hard. You know, a lot of times in DEI work with my clients, basically everyone in the institution, every time something happens, it is so big to them. It is so visceral. It is so powerful. But my experience, having been a historian, is I can put things in perspective. So for example, this one is not something that's powerful and that heated, but recently it's been interesting watching Black folks shift from African-American to Black. And I'm old enough to remember when the shift was from Black to African-American. And so sometimes people come to me with things like that, and they're troubled and they're trying to figure out like what to do and why is this happening. And I'll say, you know, the label isn't what matters. What matters is paying attention to what people are trying to express by a label at a given time. And that's not something that I would have understood, I think, if I hadn't studied it historically before. So this sort of longer term perspective allows me again to be sort of sensitive to real time escalation, but at the same time, not to let it get me heightened and escalated.
Sure.
And I think for me, it's kind of similar, I think, to what Chris was saying. And I think, you know, I don't know if it's anything from Northwestern specifically. Sorry, Northwestern. I would say I probably draw more on my law school experience. And that's helped me in this profession to understand systems, but also to provide me the power and privilege to speak sometimes, because lawyers, as you all know, have a more privileged path than some other professions. And so, you know, of course, you got to get through the microaggression first, that people are surprised that I'm a lawyer. But once I am, it does allow me to speak on this. And then also just the skills that you gain. People say right now, they're like, do you miss being a lawyer? And I say, no. I use all my lawyer skills every day in this, the amount of negotiation and you know, trying to help people understand, and writing and advocating. No, it's very real, all those skills that I gained in law school. So for me, that would probably be, at least educationally. I still draw back though to my experience at Northwestern, and understanding the feelings of what it felt like. And you know, it's no secret there's still race issues at Northwestern. And you know, just being in those moments where that happens, and that happens to your friends, and you know, and that idea of, you know, what is it, and then trying to explain it like Chris was saying. So for me, that's really what Northwestern gave me, was more of those experiences.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Jen, talking about, you know, what Northwestern gave you with the experiences. And I'm curious, my next question is, you know, for students and young alumni interested in this career path themselves, networking is something we talk a lot about at Northwestern and in these panels. And just curious, advice you all would have for students who are interested in networking within this field, hoping to find a career similar to one of yours in the future. And also curious, if you've had Northwestern network connections that have played into your career path. I know, Michael, you mentioned, a friend who helped you get into that first role. Maybe we can start with you and just share a little bit more about your perspective from networking.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Northwestern network is huge, and sometimes I understate just how big it is. I think I personally forget how big it is. My first job, yes, was from someone helped me. The person who put me onto it was a Northwestern alum, but the man who's actually running it at that time also went to Northwestern. Andres Tapia, he I think was like class 80 something or another, I can't really remember, but he's a pretty well-known person in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, has certainly been a champion for many Northwestern alum who are looking to get involved with the bodies of work. I think what's important with networking anytime is to just be very thoughtful about what you're going to people with. I would imagine that my fellow panelists get outreach all the time. I do as well. And I think one of the things that makes it easy for me to just say absolutely happy to chat is when you come to me with a very real question. Like, Michael, I would love to talk about, the time at Accenture and how you connected the dots between this and whatever it might be. Please let me know if you have time. Like, it gets a little bit harder to say yes when folks are just like, I want some of your time, and they don't necessarily give me a window into what they're trying to get out of it together. I was really big, especially very early in my career, about just straight up LinkedIn stalking people. I didn't know that it could have been seen as inappropriate. I actually didn't really care, but I started with folks who went to Northwestern and folks who went to Columbia and folks who, may be in my fraternity or whatever it might be, to try to find some level of commonality. But it always was people who were doing the work that I eventually saw myself doing, so that I was able to get a sense of what their path was and how I might back into it from the seat that I'm in right then, which I think then goes back to having a very specific question when you approach them, and being willing to, be humble enough to just say, hey, I don't actually know, like, let me know. I want to add one thing that might sound shady, but I think is really important, is that you do want to be very thoughtful about who you reach out to. There are a lot of people right now who are calling themselves diversity, equity, and inclusion experts and influencers and talking heads that, in my opinion, just simply don't have the chops. They have very strong opinions, a very strong point of view, but have like literally never done the work. I think there's value in their point of view, but it may not necessarily be what you want to anchor onto as you're making decisions about how you want to navigate your career and what decisions that you might want to make therein. And so, I would definitely say, look to see what they have done, like where are your receipts? Let me understand, the type of work you've done, so that you're not spinning your wheels talking to folks that can't necessarily influence or inform the direction that you go in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That advice that he just gave, Michael just gave. I mean, there's a lot of people out there calling themselves experts and writing books even, and like you're like, what? No. Anyway, back to the question. Yes. So networking is huge, and I certainly had some alumni from Northwestern who, in fact, it probably wasn't even until after I graduated, so that once I came back to my hometown, and kind of realizing that there was this network here, certain lawyers and judges who'd gone to Northwestern, reaching out to them and just talking. But I mean, the truth is you're going to get your jobs through your network, and Michael's absolutely right. You have to do it in a very strategic way. And also, now that, I don't know, but I'm sure my fellow panelists would agree, like now that I'm kind of at the other end of that kind of, it's also very challenging for me when people reach out, because I know as soon as I help you, I put my label on you, and my brand is powerful, right? All we have is our brand. And so we as the mentors also have to be, or sponsors or allies or whatever we want to call ourselves, also have to be really thoughtful. And as Michael said, you coming with specifics or questions or things like that is easier for me anyway to help you or want to help you. I think that, you know, I didn't get where I am today without a powerful network of people. And I think number one is just about being authentic with yourself, authentic with them. And the truth is that your network is a two-way street. And so while it's funny, like where I, as a young professional, had connected with people, like today, I am now in some circumstances their person that's over them. And so you never know how it's going to go. So I think just being your authentic self is always really, really helpful. And I would say again, don't hesitate to reach out, but just reach out. Echoing again what Michael said, so important, strategically and with purpose.
I think there's a a pretty good understanding of the utilization of networks when you're sort of coming out as an undergraduate student. One thing I would also suggest that people consider is to be open to all sorts of people being in your network. It had not been my experience that my network that played major factors in me getting the things that I ultimately achieved. It had not been my experience that those came through traditional places. So for example, even getting my first job in the city of Chicago, that happened because one of my dance students was a vice chancellor at UIC. And he put me into contact with a network of administrators across the city of Chicago, which ultimately got me to my position at Loyola. So don't allow yourself to think that networks only come from specific places. There are lots of places where you may meet like-minded people who want to support you through your journey, and you should be open to them. And that also says a little bit about how you want to carry yourself in the life that you traverse. So for example, in a dance environment, you know, teachers can be kind of shady and shisty. And so if I had given a poor impression of myself as being the lead instructor in one of the largest schools in the city of Chicago, I wouldn't have made a positive impression on the vice chancellor at UIC. So even though you might think to yourself, well, I'm in a space that has nothing to do with my career, do recognize the way that you comport yourself in the world can have positive or negative impacts on where you are ultimately able to go. And it can, in some cases, shut off potential networks or even expose you to networks that you weren't even there. You didn't even know were there.
For sure, this is great advice, everything here. And before we get to an audience question that we received, we'd love to do some fun closing advice question that I always end my events with. But what advice do you have to the class of 2021 and those current students and those even looking to get into this path? We can start with that.
What order are we doing, Cassie?
Yeah, let's start with Chris.
Okay. I would say two things. First, broadly, and I got this advice from a president of Cal Riverside when I was an ACE fellow, American Council on Education fellow. He gave a talk to all of us who were kind of emerging leaders in higher education. At the end of his talk, he said, do every opportunity. Every opportunity you get, just take it, try it out, because you don't know where it's going to go. And I think that's good advice because similar to what Jennifer said earlier, opportunities become drawn to people who take opportunities. So if you close yourself off to opportunities, they will not come to you. And then the second piece of advice that I would give you, let's transition from the first. Try to keep yourself integrated when you take on an opportunity. If you can't see what it's doing for you personally or where it's going to take you, that might not be the thing to take. But don't refrain from doing it because it's challenging. And along the lines of that self-care, really practice good self-care, especially if you're going to do DEI work. Oppression, all of the isms will exist long after you. And no amount of anger, anxiety, depression, raging at the wind, none of that will do anything to make those things go away. It's only going to raise your cortisol and make you die earlier. So you have to take care of yourself so that you can stay in the work in a healthy way. And that means when it's time to stop, go home and watch Netflix, do yoga, drink coffee, sit back, do whatever it is, and don't feel guilty that DEI is not on your mind 24/7, because it shouldn't, because that is not a healthy way to live.
Literally, Chris took, like, those are awesome. I mean, I echo everything that he just said, especially that self-care. I will steal all three of his and then also add just be passionate about whatever you do. And if you lose the passion, move on. Like, it's not, you know, I'm 41 now years old, and I earned my protective older American status, and I don't know what happened, but once that happened, I was like, you know, I'm only going to do things that make me happy now. I'm not going to worry about it. I wish I would have known that younger. I wish I would have had that kind of mindset when I was a little bit younger, and I would have maybe practiced more self-care, like Chris said, or you know, not taken things so personal in this kind of work, because it's really hard and challenging. And so thinking about that, like, if you're not passionate about it, and that's it with anything, no matter what career, that's my advice. And then again, just because it is so important, that idea about opportunity, don't self-select out of opportunity. People say all the time, because I do, you know, we do a lot of workforce planning, we talk about pipelines, and people will say, well, I'm just not qualified, or I don't know, I don't meet all of the things. Well, they don't, especially in this field, they don't really know what they want. So don't self-select out. You can't say no or yes to an opportunity if you don't apply, or you don't try, or you don't open yourself to it. So that would be an extra bonus I would add to all of the opportunity that Chris had just mentioned. So those are my two extras.
I cannot agree more with the self-care piece. I think it's critical. I think I might add a twist to it around having fun. Just make sure you have fun. You know, there will be plenty of time to work your ass off. There'll be plenty of time to, you know, do everything that you need to do. But there's something incredibly beautiful about leaving it all on the field when you have the opportunity to leave it all on the field. You don't necessarily want to get down the line and look back and feel like you didn't do enough and have enough fun and experience enough. And so lean into that. And I think as a corollary to that is really trusting your own journey. You know, I think as you come out of these really intense academic experiences, the tendency is to look at your peers and your classmates and see who landed at McKinsey and who landed at Goldman and who landed at Google and Amazon, all the others. And kudos to them. But there will also be a group of y'all that won't land at those places, and that's okay. There will be a group of y'all that land somewhere else and do something totally different, and your path is valuable and virtuous and uniquely yours, and most importantly, divinely ordained. And so leaning into that and allowing that to be what it is, I think, really, really critical, particularly as you go into spots and spaces that are unfamiliar and new to you, as most of the world will be after you graduate from college. I think it'll be critical that you just own that your journey is your own. And, you know, the finish line, you don't have to sprint to. It'll be there and you will get there. You know, just be patient and allow it to come to you.
Awesome. Those are such good advice. Thank you so much for that. And now we'll get to some of the audience questions that we received. So we have, as a current DEI practitioner consulting for various businesses and organizations, I'm curious about the panel's experiences, successes, or challenges in reframing DEI, not only as an internal team culture building initiative, but also a lens that can influence the organization's external work with communities and society. Have you met resistance when you tried to make DEI more externally focused?
Have you met resistance?
That's a given, right? Resistance is a given in this profession. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, there's always resistance. I think I'm gonna kind of reframe the question a little bit away from the resistance and maybe talk about two challenges that I don't think people talk about with DEI sometimes. It's certainly they're new to me. I'd say over the last 2 years, I've realized that a lot of times when people come in with the DEI test, and so I always talk about my customers as clients, like deans, department chairs, student groups, etc. Clients. People come in with a DEI request, and really DEI is thinking. Usually, they're having some pretty serious issues around emotional intelligence, and there is also cultural trauma that's occurred. And the emotional intelligence and cultural trauma stuff is actually in some ways deeper than the DEI. It's like the trauma leads to a manifestation of DEI related episodes and phenomena. And so recently I incorporated restorative justice practices into my toolkit because I'm realizing that we'd be more proactive and help leaders heal their communities proactively in advance of some specific DEI issue coming up. And I've also realized that if you do a DEI fix, like say I do a workshop on ability and higher education, but your culture's jacked, the workshop's not doing anything. So one thing I would urge new people about is to not just consider understanding content and subject matter expertise. Try to get some help in learning those like conflict negotiation or community-oriented conflict negotiation, restorative justice, because those are, I can't even really think of the metaphor, but it's oftentimes the DEI work is like the acute moment, but that acute moment exists within a context. And so you've got to think about the acute moment and the context that you're trying to heal.
Yeah, actually that idea of trauma, that's something that we've been training on and looking into, specifically around when you look at it as in correlated to disciplinary actions in the workforce. So remember, I do a lot of the workforce retention, things like that. And so going back and saying, you know, especially childhood trauma and what all of that, you know, entails. We do you know, organizational diversity culture shifting, and for me, you know, 4 years ago when I stood up and took this role and really got to decide what it was going to be, I said we're moving away from a check the box system where, you know, we make affirmative action plans, but then they sit on the shelf and nobody does anything. And so for us, you know, like the resistance is real because people don't like change. But you know, it's a slow kind of roll in terms of getting people to really see the value of it and being able to understand how to talk about it in different ways with different people so they can connect to it, and then eventually you get everyone kind of bought into the same kind of vision. I will tell you right now, one of the biggest challenges we're having in our state, and really this is more of my education side, is around this idea of critical race theory and the misunderstanding of it, and what challenges are being posed by those groups of people who are you know, misunderstanding basically. And so, you know, those are things that, you know, it gets real and it gets hard, and so we're talking about, you know, DEI within ourselves, we're talking about within our institutions, we're talking about it in our cultures, and then we're talking about it in that bigger systemic you know, way. And that's, you know, there is certainly resistance in all aspects. For the state of Ohio, we actually, over the summer after all the events that happened, we did a statewide, so all of our state employees were required, which the governor wanted it required. I would never recommend required DEI training, but it required implicit bias training. And I will tell you, some of the anonymous comments we got made it really scary to really believe that, you know, these are fellow coworkers who think these things and have such awful, horrendous things. And part of it is what Chris started off by saying, just not understanding the systems. And we have a lot of people that unfortunately are oppressed themselves, don't even understand it by the systems, and yet carry out the oppression every day. You know, our rural our poor white friends, like they are oppressed as well and don't understand. And so I think right now those are some of our bigger challenges, kind of working through this as systems. But every day it becomes about a real true culture shift in an organization for us. And so if you're out there and you're talking to people and you are getting interviews and they want you to just do a check the box kind of program, that's not DEI. That's not DEI. That's not what it is. And I think that that's really something that's important to kind of think about, as you explore this work. It's got to be real and it's got to be impactful, and you got to be able to talk about hard stuff like we've kind of talked about today in safe ways for people and meet them where they are. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because now my baby's like wanting to go upside down. I'm trying to keep him off camera, but it might not work.
So cute. Awesome. Thank you, Janet. And Michael, was there anything you wanted to say?
I wouldn't add anything. I think it's spot on. Meeting people where they are, understanding that this is a journey, being able to speak to what's in it for them, I think is critical. The only thing I will add is that not everyone will be convinced, and there's a point in every, I think, DEI professional's career where you have to be comfortable letting some people go and just letting them be the haters over to the side while you focus on the people that you can bring along a little bit more seamlessly.
For sure. Thank you all. And then the last question here from the audience circulates around just like the value that organizations and institutions put on DEI. So I know that some universities and companies target DEI staff for pay cuts, layoffs, et cetera, because they sometimes see these employees as expendable. I wonder how these alums navigate the feeling of being precarious employees if they feel that way.
I personally don't feel that way today because I do think diversity, equity, and inclusion is totally in style and in vogue right now. And so probably 10 years ago, that would have been something that I was really concerned about and truthfully informed my decision to go to business school and do consulting because I wanted to not be seen as a one-trick pony for whatever reason. I'll also say, though, that the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion will have to take place anywhere. So you could lose your job, but there'll always be some more work that can be done. And so, being afraid that you won't, survive a layoff or something like that, I think is a reasonable and rational fear to have, but know that there'll always be an opportunity for you to be leveraged and add value somewhere else. And, that's something I think that's going to be critical to keep in mind.
Yeah, I don't feel expendable either right now. In fact, even in a state where, budgets are cut, they're trying to put more resources behind my work. I think it's a mindset. I tell people all the time, you are a DEI professional if that is what you want to be. I mean, if you have passion and you care, we need more people like us in all industries, in all systems, in all levels to keep pushing, to really make the bigger systemic impact that we actually need to see real work. So even if you don't have a title of DEI this or that, you can be anything and still be a DEI professional. We kind of said something about the degrees being offered, like, okay, it's all made up right now to get money, to get you to buy stuff. Truly, you probably in your own experiences, in your own work, in your own passion, have enough experience to do this. You might need more technical experience if you want to do, legal compliance or things like that. But, truly, you all can be DI professionals, even right now, in the work that you're doing, in the studies that you're doing, because really it's just about a mindset. To me, it's about the ability to advocate and push forward, to look at things under a historical lens, to take that, to move forward, like Chris was saying, and really just see the bigger picture and understand that we are all truly linked together in everything that we do. And that's the only way we're all going to get out of this. So, hi, welcome to the profession of DEI. You all are part of it.
I would say that I don't feel concerned today, but it is something I think about. First, at the macro level, I would argue that the larger demographic and economic patterns that are currently involved in mitigate against DEI going away. So our population as a nation is increasingly diverse, and the business world is integrated into a global economy. With that being the case, businesses will not be successful if they are not able to function in those environments. They're just not going to, particularly with fungibility of money and spending power right now, even in something like higher ed, if students don't like it, they can go somewhere else. So there is an economic incentive to be good DEI. In addition to that, not most, all of the studies, business, higher education, pedagogy, etc., make it very clear that schools and businesses are more effective when they're diverse. And the last study I saw is that it actually can improve the bottom line for businesses to up to as much as 30%. So I often say, I don't really care when you go home. If you don't want Black people in your house, that's fine with me. But when you're here, there are things that you need to do to make this place excellent. And increasingly, that is going to be the case. I do think you want to do this. It is good to try to understand how the work that you do affects the bottom line. So with like employee resource groups, for example, there's a lot of studies that indicate employee resource groups make for more happy employees and more productive employees, and businesses like that because there's less turnover and they're saving money. So there are ways to demonstrate that your work, when done effectively, is impacting the bottom line in a way that makes you less vulnerable to budget cuts.
Yeah, you all have shared so many helpful insights today, and I wish we were not out of time. I feel like we could continue this conversation for so much longer, but I want to thank you all so much for sharing more about your work in the DEI field and the experiences that helped you get there. And, you know, thanks for our students and young alumni for joining us today for this really great and insightful conversation. Just a quick reminder to folks on the call, we normally buy you all lunch when you come to these programs on campus. And so we're going to send you a Grubhub credit so you can buy your lunch at some point in the next couple of weeks. So for students who joined us, you know, it's just a little token of our appreciation for, you know, exploring career options. So thank you again to our alumni for being here today, and for students for joining us. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Go Cats.